That's a nice piece of music.
Yeah, it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the 10th episode of Nima Voices, a virtual interview series. My name is Nancy Matsumoto. I'm a Sansei, third generation writer and editor. I write about food, drink, agroecology, and Japanese American issues. I'm also the co author of the book Exploring the World of Japanese Craft Sake, Rice, Water, Earth, which came out recently from Tuttle Publishing, and I write a blog on sake. I've been a contributor to Discover Nikkei since 2009. My last story was actually an interview with our special guest, Gil Asakawa, so I hope you'll look for that. Before we start the program, I'd like to briefly introduce the Discover Nikkei project and the Nima Voice series. Discover Nikkei is the Japanese American National Museum's international community-based web project with major funding from the Nippon Foundation. It was launched in 2005, and it includes articles in the four main languages of the Japanese diaspora: English, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese. Discover Nikkei publishes stories from the US, Peru, Canada, Argentina, Mexico, and many other countries around the world. New stories are published daily on the website. Nima, in case you're wondering, are members of the Discover Nikkei online community. They hail from all over the world, and each brings a unique experience and perspective to the site's rich archive of stories. Nima Voices is an interview series where we uplift our Nima through brief but enlightening interviews. So in this 10th episode, I'm going to be talking with Gil Asakawa, a journalist, editor, author, and blogger who covers Japan, Japanese American, and Asian American and Pacific Islander AAPI culture, as well as social justice issues in blogs, articles, and social media. He's a nationally known speaker, panelist, and expert on Japanese American and Asian American history and identity. Wait, is that your head getting bigger as I'm
Yeah, it is.
describing you? He's the author of Being Japanese American and the recently published Tabemasho, Let's Eat, a tasty history of Japanese food in America. Gil has been contributing articles to Discover Nikkei since 2009. We're the same.
Yeah.
He moderated Discover Nikkei's What is Nikkei Food program in February 2022, and he will be serving as moderator of an upcoming conversation with noted Nikkei chefs from Brazil, Peru, and the United States. We'll be chatting about his new book, his connections to Discover Nikkei, and more. After my conversation with Gil, I'm going to ask him some of your questions. So please use the YouTube or Facebook chat features to ask questions, and I'll get a few of them at the end of the conversation. I'll get to a few of them. You will need to be logged in order to use the chat feature. We'll be sharing links to the articles we mentioned in the chat and also in the video description afterwards. So keep checking the chat for various links and info. So I think we're going to just jump into my questions, Gil.
Okay.
Um,
I'm ready.
yeah, in one of your articles, you mentioned that although you were born and spent your early childhood in Japan, you didn't really examine or actively participate in Japanese American identity or culture until the early 1990s. You wrote that you were a banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you growing up in Japan with a Nisei father and a Japanese mother? How did life change for you when you moved to the US? And how did that affect your sense of identity? How did you overcome being a banana?
um, the short version is that my dad was in the U.S. Army. He was born and raised in Hawaii, and he met my mom during the Korean War in Hokkaido, where my mom is from. Her hometown is Nemuro, a small fishing city on the easternmost tip of Hokkaido. And my two brothers and I were all born in Tokyo, and we had a very bicultural existence. Like my dad was, a fluent Japanese speaker and could read. My mom, of course, is a Issei, so she spoke mostly Japanese. but she could speak English too, which is why she worked for the occupation forces, until the Korean War, when my dad met her. But we would live in civilian neighborhoods in Tokyo, and then later in Iwakuni near Hiroshima, and then go to school on military bases. And so totally had this bicultural, at school I'd be eating hamburgers and joking with, white friends and black friends, and then I come home to the neighborhood and play with my Japanese friends and eat Japanese snacks and yogurt and yogurto and all this stuff. And then when we moved to the States, it was kind of a culture shock. We moved to Northern Virginia because my dad got transferred to Washington D.C. and he was by then he was a federal employee, government employee, and it was interesting because when we moved in 1966, American fast food hadn't arrived in Japan at the time. So uh, I didn't know about McDonald's or Taco Bell or Kentucky Fried Chicken or any of that stuff. And man, I ate it up right away when we got to the US. There are lots of things that I wish I had held on to, like more Japanese. My language skills are terrible now, more than I think a lot of Japanese Americans, but not at all like a fluent Japanese speaker, and I really regret that. But I also, like, in 3 weeks or a month, I learned every American cuss word, forgot most of my Japanese, and learned to love all this American fast food. I mean, my first taco was a Jack in the Box in Sterling Park, Virginia. So that kind of tells you where my taste buds were. But my mom always cooked Japanese food, right, in the home, sometimes to the embarrassment of my brothers and I, because I'd bring home, friends from high school, and I'd open the door and my mom was cooking oden, and you can just smell the daikon kind of wafting all over the house. And I turn around and go, "Oh, Mom, gosh, uh, hey guys, let's run upstairs to my room and just hang out up there," because it just stunk. And then my mom would cook salmon. So even after we went, came to the U.S., I had this bicultural experience. Not so much in language anymore because I pretty much would speak English back to my mom, and she would speak Japanese to me. At least I could understand it. But in food, I had a very bicultural upbringing, and I just, kind of loved paying attention to food. I guess is kind of what led to this book.
Yeah, no, we talked a little bit in our interview about that real desire to assimilate, which probably
Yeah,
drove that desire to be a banana, because you just really wanted to fit in. And maybe if you hadn't been in Northern Virginia and had been someplace much more multicultural, maybe it
yeah.
wouldn't have been
No,
so strong.
if we had settled in L.A. or the
Right.
Bay Area, I'm sure it would have been different. My wife grew up in the Denver Buddhist temple community. She watched Nisei or Japanese American basketball, and there were JA baseball leagues, and no, where we were in the suburbs of Washington D.C., um, I my brother and I were like the only Asians that were in our class, and then all our friends were white, at the time. So I was kind of a banana. I grew up kind of thinking of myself as a white kid, and it was my wife, after I first met her. She just flat out said, she called me a banana, and and she was right. But what kind of got me interested in my roots was the fact that my dad, in um, 1991, was diagnosed with cancer, lung cancer. Thank you, U.S. Army, for giving him a carton of Lucky Strikes every week for, like, 12 years or something. And he smoked till the end. But when he got sick, I got interested in my roots. I said, "Hey, Dad, what was it like being in Pearl Harbor, because he and his brothers and sisters were all born in Hawaii. And he goes, I don't know. I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You were all born in Hawaii. Yeah, but your grandfather took us all to Japan in 1940. What? you know,
I
so
know.
those kinds of things got me really interested in my roots.
Yeah, it's amazing how so many of us didn't know really, really key facts about our parents until so late.
They
And
never
often,
talked about it.
yeah, they never talked about it. And then it's only the threat of maybe losing them where you think, oh no, I only have a certain
Yeah.
amount of time.
Yep.
I wanted to ask about being Japanese American, because that's the book that you wrote before, Tabemasho. And I know it grew out of the blogging on Asian American and AAPI issues you were doing. And I'm wondering what you think has changed since that book was first published in 2004, because I know you did a revised edition.
Yeah.
How do you think your sense of Japanese American identity differs? Oh, well, we can get into that later. Maybe you can answer this question first.
Um, you know, when I first wrote Being Japanese American, like Tabemasho, it's really as much of a memoir as it is a historical document about the community. But I would say that the difference in the 10 years between the first publication and when I was asked to revise it is that by 2014, a lot of things that were Japanese became more popular. They were getting popular already. I mean, like with food, we'll talk about when Japanese food kind of caught on, and things were catching on. But one of the reasons I kind of felt like we needed to update the book is because of the enormous popularity of manga and anime. And I was being asked to speak at comic cons here in or anime conventions here in Denver, and it's amazing to see 9,000 people wandering through a hotel. 70% of them were Caucasian, and like 40% of them are wearing kind of poorly done but still costumes. So they were in cosplay mode. And then like 10% were like spot on, spent all this time and money to make great costumes, and look just like the characters they were portraying. And and I realized that the culture had caught on so much that it was worth doing a revision of Being Japanese American.
Yeah, there's so much that's cool about Japan, from anime to food and pop culture. Do
Yep.
you think it's kind of raised the collective self-esteem of us JAs? Like, we don't have to be bananas because we're cool now. Do
No,
you see that?
I think that's really true. And I think that's always pop culture has always been kind of the entree, right? For both for outsiders, non-Japanese, to become interested in our culture. But in that action, it's made us more, I don't know, credible. I don't want to say significant, but somehow more important. That you're
Hmm.
right, that we don't have to feel like we're like not important. But it happened as early as 1963, 1964, when Q Sakamoto's song,
Hmm.
Ue o Moite Aruko, was renamed Sukiyaki and became a number one hit in the American top 40. And I tell people that I think a lot of Japanese Americans consider that their national anthem because uh, it came at the same year, 1964, as the Tokyo Olympics, which helped Japan say to the world that we're here, we're back, we've recovered from World War II. And in a way, the song, Sukiyaki being renamed as Sukiyaki, uh, the fact that it was a huge hit made it okay to be Japanese American. And we all kind of as a community could feel prouder for it.
Yeah, that was like the precursor to J-pop.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you're right. Do you think that your sense of Japanese American identity is different from other Sansei and Yonsei? You have a very unusual,
Mm,
very different from typical Sansei and Yonsei who just grew
yeah.
up in the United States and really don't know that much about Japan. Um, do you have a little bit of an outsider perspective, maybe?
I think I do, very much so, because like the incarceration experience, World War II experience, the 442nd experience of Japanese Americans, I actually didn't know about them because nobody taught me. For one thing, they just never talked about that in schools, in American schools. But also, I didn't know because I wasn't part of the community, and I really kind of became immersed in the community when I met my wife, Erin Yoshimura, who is a Yonsei, who is kind of more Japanese than a lot of Sansei. She's almost a Nisei in her mentality, I think. Um, she was born in LA, but raised in Denver from infancy, and part of this local community and the traditions and going to bon odori and dancing and she performed in the karaoke contest that they have every year here at the Denver Buddhist Temple, uh, and she was kind of my entree into the JA community because I was an outsider. I My family doesn't have incarceration in its history. That's kind of the number one big difference.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a huge difference.
yeah, I read about it, but
Yeah,
really didn't read about it until I read Bill Hosokawa's book,
yeah.
Nisei, The Quiet Americans.
And she's so, I mean, is it that she became so Nisei like when she's Yonsei? I mean, like, for example, did she study Japanese or?
No, she was raised by her bachan, her great grandmother, because her mother was and grandmother both worked when she was born, and her first language was Nihongo from her great grandmother, and so she has a lot of the traditional values in her upbringing, where I had them when I was in Japan, but I kind of threw them off when that family moved to the States. You
Yeah,
know,
no, that's very cool. She's very lucky to have that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I want to ask a little bit about your Discover Nikkei stories. You've written many stories about Japan, Japanese American, and Asian American, and Pacific Islander culture, and social justice issues for a lot of different publications like Pacific Citizen, Nichibei Weekly, for your own Nikkei View blog, and then also Discover Nikkei. I'm just wondering how you decide what to write about and what leads you to a story.
Totally random. Well, I'm a news hound. As you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. We pay attention to what's going on in the world, and I send myself emails. I'll lately I've been downloading articles, saving them as PDFs of things that I find interesting, and I put them into a folder. And I have a Nikkei View folder. I actually don't look at it very often, but I do put stories and links in there, and they're just things for me to follow up on. But a lot of what I decide to write about really kind of comes with a deadline. Typical journalist. It's when it's when the editor of the Pacific Citizen, JCL's national newspaper, says, "Hey Gil, can you get me a piece for the November 5th issue? I'll need it on like November 1st," and I put that in my calendar. And on like October 31st, I'll be going, what am I gonna write about? And I was just in the Bay Area to do a couple of book readings in San Jose and San Francisco, Japantowns, and I will probably write about one of my wonderful experiences that I had while we were in California, which is I could write about the Tanforan Memorial that was completed this year. At the site of the racetrack where a lot of 7,000 Japanese Americans were, imprisoned in assembly centers, temporary places, and living in horse stalls. And it's really a cool memorial. It's behind Target because Tanforan is these days a shopping center. Or I could write about the other great experience I had is that we got to go to Hikari Farms, which is an organic farm south of San Jose in Watsonville. And Hikari Farms is Japanese American owned, and they grow organic Japanese vegetables and produce and greens. And we spent most of a day there. I helped the the woman, Janet Nagamine, is you know she runs the place, but she's also a medical doctor who works for Kaiser. Her parents started the farm, and we helped her mother, who is now 101, trim and peel rakyo. And my fingers smelled for days afterwards, and it was such a great time. And then they fed us this wonderful nabe hot pot meal for lunch with chicken and tofu and all this wonderful produce from the farm. It was a great
Wow.
experience, and so I want to write a little something about that. Might be for the blog, might be for the Pacific Citizen, but there are deadlines facing me now. So,
Yeah, no, I totally get that. We're definitely deadline driven, but I would love to read that Hikari Farm story. It's right up my
oh yeah, it is,
agricultural
huh?
alley. Yeah.
It's a great family story
Yeah,
too.
it sounds amazing. I really love that you write a lot about racism, stereotypes in consumer products, but also in film and in the arts. One of your recent articles talked about packaging for peanuts, which I've actually seen. I think I saw them maybe in Mexico,
Yeah,
that had this caricature of a Japanese woman dressed like a geisha with what you call the wonton font.
yeah.
Um, but I wanted to ask you, I mean, you called that out. I think it was great that you did that, saying like, we've gotten rid of Mrs. Butterworth and Aunt Jemima, and yet this kind of thing
Is
dealing with Asian
interesting.
Americans is still
Yeah,
going on. But I wanted to ask you about how we've seen so many hate crimes. I mean, I'm in New York City now, and I know people just in my circle who have been victims of anti-Asian hate crimes and who are afraid to ride the subway. And what do you think is going on? And is it connected to those kinds of stereotyping that you've called out in
yeah,
other places?
totally. I mean, racism is a fact of life in the United States, and I'm globally. I know every country has problems with stereotypes and racism of the other. It's just that in the United States, there happens to be a lot of other others. uh, and Asians have been an easy target because, unlike the Irish, who were the other when they first arrived here, or the Italians, who, both of whom could eventually kind of assimilate into quote unquote white America, we're always going to be the other. We're like the
Right.
African American or the Latino or Latinx community. Oh, and speaking of which, I I although I wrote about those peanuts and said the packaging was racist, I also know that that it's just a very popular product in Mexico.
They do taste good.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
I bought a bunch because we have a
Yeah.
collection of artifacts like that. But um, and so I'm not saying that people in Mexico are racist or whatever. This was a very American based opinion
Hmm.
that I was responding to. Because the fact of the matter is, it actually was invented, that product, those Japanese style peanuts, were actually invented by a Japanese immigrant in Mexico. So, what are you going to do?
Right.
Uh, but, um, but anyway, uh, there's been a wave of anti Asian hate that for a long time, forever, basically. When you look back at various exclusion laws, the Chinese exclusion law, the gentlemen's agreements, and ways to make it so Japanese immigrants can't own land. There's so many ways that Asians have been beaten down over 150 years, and it's not a surprise, and every Asian community has faced that at some point or other. And since the last administration and the rise of COVID, it's become so easy to target Asians. And
Right.
so I think it's just, unfortunately, something that will always somehow have to be on guard about.
Hmm.
Like you, I know a lot of, not a lot, but I do know Asians who have been spit on here in Denver. I,
Mm.
heard about a woman who had her laundry, you know, destroyed by a woman pouring bleach on top of it. Vietnamese immigrant, that this happened to her, and a Japanese American young woman who was kind of assaulted by a car next to her at a traffic light, where they started yelling things at her, and then they sprayed disinfectant in her
Oh my
window,
gosh.
at her. So these are things that, like, racists have found new ways to attack us, and that's
Mhm.
disturbing, I think, to me.
Right, and you're right, there's always some new excuse, like this time it's COVID,
Yeah.
the whole, you know, Wuhan virus and all of that.
Yeah. When
But
Japan was very successful in their economy,
right,
we were the targets. The Japanese were the targets.
right.
You know,
Mhm.
so it's cyclical. Uh,
Yeah. Well,
Sadly.
I want to get to your book before we run out of time.
Uh,
So we want to talk about Tabemasho. It's organized like a menu in different chapters on Japanese ingredients like dashi and soybeans. And you have sections on old school favorites like sukiyaki, teriyaki, tempura. I'm wondering if there were categories that you were maybe less familiar with and that you really had fun researching and maybe came out of the research with some new favorite dishes that you didn't know about or didn't like so much before.
I have to say that I I researched a lot, and there were things that I didn't know. There were things that I learned that I found interesting, and it really is set up that way because in the early days of Japanese cuisine in America, there really were only three things that Americans really knew: sukiyaki, teriyaki, and tempura. And that's because of World War II, and when the occupation troops came home with their, with all their souvenirs they bought, and all that. Those are the foods that they knew about. And then the things that I researched that I found kind of surprising were things about, like, tuna and salmon, which we think of as standard sashimi and sushi fare, but they weren't. Tuna was considered this bloody, stinky, weird junk fish that wasn't popular except for chicken of the sea, canned tuna, and pet food. Or it would get tossed out if sport fishermen caught a big tuna. They just throw it out or throw it back in the ocean for other fish to eat. Salmon in Japan. My mom grew up in eastern Hokkaido. She loves salmon, but and that never occurred to me that salmon in Japan for basically centuries, they grilled it because of parasites
Right.
in the salmon. And it took a Norwegian government employee who was sent to Japan to try to pitch the idea of eating farm raised Norwegian salmon, which had no parasites, but to eat it raw as sashimi and for sushi. And it finally caught on. But I had no idea that it took that for salmon to become a part of the sushi menu, and that really was only in the 1990s. So things like that take a long time. And sushi, just to look at sushi as an example, sushi had this weird curve where, sushi in Japan is hundreds of years old and various variations of it. Um, but in the US, sushi was considered just weird, exotic, gross. I was teased as a kid when we first moved to the States. Kids would say, "Ooh, you eat sushi, right? You eat that raw fish. That's gross." And I bet those kids, grandkids today, eat sushi right from the supermarket, which is like this sushi here from the supermarket. Not the greatest, but hey, it'll do in a pinch. Um, and sushi, really, even until the mid 80s and into the early 90s, sushi was not common in Japanese restaurants. So I'd like to play a very short video clip from a movie called The Breakfast Club. And it starred a bunch of then unknown but soon to be somewhat celebrity Hollywood actors. And it was about a group of high school students who are in detention, and they have to sit together in the library, and they're not getting along. But one of them has an unusual lunch. So if we can play that video, that'd be great.
What's in there?
Cass, where's your lunch?
You're wearing it.
You're nauseating.
What's that?
Sushi.
Sushi?
Rice, raw fish, and seaweed.
You won't accept a guy's tongue in your mouth and you're gonna eat that?
Can I eat?
I don't know. Give it a try.
So I'm thinking Judd Nelson, the actor there, was probably in my third grade class. And he just never grew up.
Eating the bad sushi, right?
Yeah. And I want everybody to note that when she brought out the bento box, nice bento box, out of her lunch bag or whatever, she also brought out a little bottle of shoyu, soy sauce. And it wasn't covered or anything. So I had to ask myself, how did she bring that to school without it pouring out all over the place? But that's Hollywood, I guess.
The magic of Hollywood. Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah.
It really shows the state of deeper Japanese cuisine in middle America at the time. Within a few years, it became, very popular with yuppies and celebrities and kind of a glamorous thing to eat. And so there are all these trajectories of Japanese foods, like with sushi, like with ramen. I write a whole chapter about ramen, and I have a whole chapter about bowls, like beef bowls, and which are kind of outgrowths of sukiyaki, actually. And I don't know about LA or other places, but in Denver, I can't find a restaurant that serves sukiyaki anymore. And yet sukiyaki, teriyaki, tempura were always on Japanese restaurants' menus throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and 70s, and well into the 80s.
That's a really good point. You don't see it in restaurants anymore. It's a home cooked dish.
Yes. Our family puts it on Christmas Eve.
We did too when I was growing up, and I still do it at home with my family.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on to Discover Nikkei food programs. In February this year, you moderated a virtual multilingual program for Discover Nikkei about Nikkei food. What did you take away from that experience? In your opinion, how is Nikkei food different from traditional Japanese cuisine? And do you think it's in some ways better than traditional Japanese cuisine?
I hesitate to say either is better, but it did inform. Although I don't write about like Japanese Latin food, Peruvian or Brazilian food in my book, it definitely cemented for me the idea that Japanese food evolves, and that culture it evolves like culture evolves. Culture isn't static. So we have all these references to the past, to our traditions, to our values, but we bring in the new. We color our values with stuff that are American, that are Peruvian, that are Brazilian. And I found that really interesting. I mean, you see it very clearly in like Hawaiian food, like Japanese food in Hawaii. It's wonderful because it's Hawaii. Spam musubi is a Hawaiian creation. Lokomoko is a Hawaiian creation, and I guess lokomoko isn't very Japanese, but um, I love Hawaiian food. It deserves its own book. Actually, it has its own book. It's called Cow Cow, and I just bought it last week in San Jose. But I love that cuisine evolves. And when I started writing about cuisine on food on my blog, I used to be kind of a snob, and I would, make comments about cultural appropriation. And I write about that in the book towards the end. I think cultural appropriation is bad. It does happen. People just kind of steal Japanese elements or Chinese or Filipino or whatever to make something that's trendy and fake. But ultimately, if it's done with appreciation and respect for the culture, and an eye to tradition and history, I think evolution is inevitable and you can't stop it. It's like social media, right? I used to talk to journalists about, hey, you ought to be putting your stuff out on Twitter and Facebook to promote yourself. They're like, that's just more work. What am I going to say in 140 characters? It's 160 characters now, or whatever. But you can't stop. You may not think it's progress, but things are moving forward and you can't stop it. So you might as well find ways to embrace it and pick out what's good in it. And I think that's true of cuisine.
Yeah.
That fusion cuisine is a weird term, but I'm okay now with uh, putting together kind of things that typically would not be used together in Japanese food.
Right, right. So I'm very excited that based on the feedback from that program, Discover Nikkei will be presenting a follow-up program
Hmm?
about Nikkei food on December 3rd, and you'll be moderating that program, which will feature a conversation with three noted Nikkei chefs, Nikki Nakayama of N Naka in Los Angeles, Tema Shiraishi of Aizome in Sao Paulo and in Brazil, and Roger Arakaki of Sushi Ito in Lima, Peru. There are a couple of Nikkei restaurants in New York, and I love it. It's really fascinating mix of cuisines. Um, I'm going to sort of have to move on this. Just we're running out of time, but wondering if you've also you've shared your articles on Discover Nikkei. You've participated in various public programs. You've also served as editorial committee member for a couple of Nikkei Chronicles special writing series, including the most recent one, Itadakimasu 3, Nikkei Food, Family, and Community. I worked on one of the earlier Nikkei or Itadakimasu series, and it was really fun. Do you have a particular story that you really liked or that resonated with you?
I actually did judge the English language submissions. Excuse me. Whew. And uh, I just sent in my judge's comments today, and the one that I liked a lot, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say because if it's not going to be announced, but it was by a young Yonsei woman who is a journalism student, and it was about cooking Japanese food and putting it on social media in a way that um, she used that as an entree to talk about kind of the bad side of social media and getting all these comments about, what she had cooked um, and I think it just showed me that she's a smart thinker
Mm-hmm.
and it's the future of our community. And like I said, with journalists, especially this current generation of journalists, uh, grew up with social media. They're very conversant and comfortable in various platforms. And so it's refreshing to me to see that um, writing about our culture can continue into the future this way.
That sounds really fascinating. And just the interplay of social media and food is really interesting, also. I'm
Yeah.
going to run to rapid fire questions. So, in every episode of Nima Voices, the guest is asked the same set of rapid fire questions. So, I'm going to shoot them at you and you just answer whatever comes to mind. Who is your Nikkei hero?
Bill Hosokawa, who was
Okay.
a journalist, editor for many years, worked in Denver. Uh, I wrote alongside him both in the Pacific Citizen newspaper and in the Rocky Mountain Giho newspaper, community newspaper here in Denver. He was a giant.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't always agree with him, And
Yeah.
he was crabby about using computers towards the end of his life, but he was a giant.
Yeah. Okay. And what is your favorite Japanese Nikkei food?
I like everything. I really like everything. I can't think of anything that like a lot of people would say, oh, I don't like natto. I love natto.
Me
and
too.
uh, um, But the one thing that makes me nostalgic, natsukashi, is chawanmushi,
Mm.
the savory egg custard, because my mom used to make it. And although she's now in a memory care center, I have her set of chawanmushi cups and lids, and I need to sit down I know it's fairly easy, but little mendokusai maybe, but I want to try making it and see if I can capture that taste and feel.
It's a great, I love it too. And it is not that hard to make. So, okay. What is the Japanese value that has most influenced you? For example, mottainai, to not be wasteful, shojiki, honesty, or gaman, perseverance, things like that.
Mottainai for sure, because I'm Japanese American. We save bags, we save plastic takeout containers, just in case we have nokori to hand out to somebody. When we have a family dinner. Um, but really, uh, the ones that have influenced me probably are not so much values, but words and phrases like "urusai," "yakamashi." And as a kid, I would hear that, and that definitely, I think, has kind of stayed with me. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Very, yeah, that would make a big impression on any kid. What do you like most about Discover Nikkei?
um, that it serves a multinational and multicultural audience and does it seamlessly. I mean, I just love the fact that you can go to Discover Nikkei and find stuff in different languages. Where do you see that in the mainstream media?
Hmm.
You usually don't. You go to a Spanish language newspaper, or maybe Portuguese language newspaper, which I have never seen in Colorado. But but here you can see our cultures expressed seamlessly side by side.
Oh, that's great. So I'm just going to mention this has been great. Thank you so much, Gil. So I
Mhm.
feel like we could just talk for hours, but our time is coming to an end. I wanted to mention this is the final Nima Voices episode of the year, but Discover Nikkei has more virtual programming planned for the new year. The next Nima Voices episode will be in Spanish with Sergio Hernandez Galindo, who is an author, professor, and researcher with the Historical Studies Unit of Mexico's
Cool.
National Institute of Anthropology and History. That sounds fascinating. So please stay tuned for more details. And then, of course, save the date for Discover Nikkei's next virtual program on Saturday, December 3rd, um, combining culinary cultures, a conversation with the Nikkei chefs. I mentioned that Gil is moderating, and I'm very excited about that one, just because you have chefs from LA, Peru, and Brazil. So that's going to be really fun.
Yeah.
That will be presented via Zoom with simultaneous translation in English. Yeah, so more details, check out Discover Nikkei soon. Um, if you're interested in reading more Nikkei food stories, check out the submitted stories for Itadakimasu 3, which are on Discover Nikkei, and you can vote for your favorites. The deadline is Halloween, October 31st, so it's easy to remember. And finally, Discover Nikkei would love to hear from all of you audience members. So please contact them at editor@discovernikkei.org with your feedback and suggestions for future episodes and program. So thank you so much, Gil. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in. I see Nikki Kawakami is from Idaho, and Marcia Takeda Morrison is from LA, and she posted a hello. I haven't checked the YouTube channel to see if anybody's posted. No, no. If you have any questions, I'd like to go over time myself.
Oh, okay. If we're able to go over time, does anyone have any questions? Do you have, I have a question, Gil,
Okay.
which is, I think I asked you this in our interview, but what's your upcoming next immediate thing after your December 3rd talk that you're moderating?
Oh, well, I'm going to do a book reading in Boston at MIT, actually. MIT has a Japan program, and they are flying me out to speak at MIT. It's a talk sponsored by the New England JACL. So I'm really looking forward to that. Boston's a great town.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
And MIT. Very interesting. Good. So you're actually traveling quite a bit for the book, which is great because you were just
Yeah.
in Sacramento and yeah.
Well, no, San Francisco
Oh,
and
San
San Jose.
Francisco. Yeah. Okay.
Love to go to LA. Hello, hello.
Hint, hint. Maybe we can do a joint thing, sake and Japanese food,
That
a
would be
book talk.
fun.
Yeah, I'm going to be in LA.
Eat and
Let's plan
drink.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if there is nothing else, I think we should wrap this up. But thank you so much, Gil.
Yeah,
It was
no, thank you, Nancy.
great to
Appreciate it.
talk to you.
And thank you to Discover Nikkei and to Janum. Discover Nikkei really is it's a great resource. So I am so glad that that you're all there, and that you really give a voice to the various aspects of the Nikkei community that would not have a voice otherwise. So I love that.
I totally agree. So many great resources that are coming out of that, including Discover Nikkei and this global Nikkei community that
Yeah.
Discover Nikkei has created.
Yep.
It's pretty amazing. So on that note, thank you again, and everyone have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
And this will be on Facebook and YouTube.
Right.
Afterwards. Okay.